Hello everyone and welcome to this LGBT History Month event with Opening Doors London and us from Switchboard. Thank you so much for joining us from your computers. It is lovely to not see you at all. My name is Shay. I am a listening volunteer at London Switchboard, and I'm joined by some really lovely people from Opening Doors London, who are going to tell us a little bit about what they do, what LGBT History Month means to them and to the people that they work with. So I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves. So Meg, would you like to start?
Hi, yes, I'm Meg. I've been working at Opening Doors London now for about the last 2 years, and I run our Befriending Service, which comprises of a face-to-face service where volunteer sees their befriender each week for around an hour or so, and also the telephone befriending service, which is obviously on the phone. Thank you. And I'm also a Switchboard volunteer, so it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Worlds collide. Fantastic. Carlin, would you like to introduce
Yeah, I'm Carlin. I'm really here as a representative of the Opening Doors service users. I'm a regular attendee at the By the Way group and have been for some time, so I've attended that both in person and more recently since the pandemic when it's been via Zoom. I've also been had some involvement with the trans and non-binary group.
Fantastic, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the variety of groups that are available at Opening Doors London shortly. And Chrissy, who may or may not have some sound issues. Talk to us, Chrissy.
Hopefully you can hear this okay. I'm the volunteer coordinator, so I look after all the volunteer recruitments and then do the initial training, and then I place volunteers with different teams within the overall team. So befriending volunteers to Meg, group volunteers to the member services departments and so forth. I've been working for Opening Doors since they gave me a job in 2011. Firstly as a sessional worker, and I've been in this job since 2014.
Fantastic. And how many volunteers have you got?
Well, at the moment we've got just short of 300 volunteers. So we have, for the size of the organisation, we have a lot of volunteers.
Yeah, that is.
And we have a lot of. I'll talk about this in a bit, actually. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Fantastic. So I've got some questions for you all. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of Opening Doors London? This may be for Chrissy because you've been there the longest, although I don't know how long the other two have.
Yeah, I can do this. Yeah, so Opening Doors London began at the end of the 2008-2009 as a single group of gay men for Educate Camden, and then having identified that need, they realised there were needs to cover more identities than just gay men, and they expanded to gay men and gay women just in Educate Camden. And Opening Doors London is still a subsidiary charity of Educate Camden, although we've expanded since. We then expanded to LGB, and then we expanded to LGBT. And currently we're registered as LGBTQ+. So it's just a big expansion over the last 12, 13 years. We've gone from one group to the point that just before the lockdown started, we were running over 40 social groups every month. We've gone from having no befriending service to having a befriending service which had face-to-face befrienders, which we will do again, which is now all tele-friending. I can talk about it, with up to or over 100 relationships.
120.
Okay, so 120 relationships, so loads and loads of relationships. And we are now expanding beyond London and starting to engage with different projects and different areas at the moment within the United Kingdom.
Just for those who absolutely don't know anything, because Opening Doors is obviously a lovely name, but it doesn't necessarily tell people who don't know anything about it. What does it do?
We support people over 50 from LGBTQ+ communities and we help them overcome isolation and loneliness. That's our mission.
Fantastic. Meg, do you want to, Chrissy was talking about the befriending, so do you want to tell us a little bit more about that area of things?
Yeah, so the Befriending Service, I think, has been going for at least 6 or 7 years, perhaps. And it started off, you know, with just one member of staff who was working 1 day a week. And then again, it's now gradually increased. Now we've got 2 full members of staff and 1 part-time member of staff. And the Befriending Service is all about helping, to reduce social isolation again. But it's for people who aren't necessarily able to leave their homes or wouldn't want to go to a group and activity. And that might be because of their mobility or because of where they're at in their life. They might not feel comfortable going on public transport, feel overwhelmed by being in a group with lots of other people, having to talk to lots of people. So it's for people who really need that one-on-one contact with somebody else. And it's the most amazing service because all of the volunteers, they form this incredible relationship with the befriender, and it's all about like meeting somebody where they are today in their life. And so for the people that we support, primarily they live alone. I can only think of one person that doesn't live alone, and the person they're living with is somebody that they care for. And for a lot of them, the only people they see is their befriender. And if they are seeing other people, it's normally a healthcare professional. So that relationship is something that's really, really special. And its way in the way in which members that I speak to talk about it is actually feeling seen and really feeling heard, because it's not about any sort of physical problems or emotional things going on in your life. It's about who you are and what you like and what your interests are, and forming a relationship that's really, really positive, and is enriching in somebody's life. And it's also sometimes when you might have other friends or family and you might not want to burden them with what you're feeling, but this person, you don't have to worry about what they're thinking about when they leave your house. So it forms a really safe space for a lot of other conversations that people have. But that's the face-to-face service, which has always been going really amazingly and well. And then literally a year ago in January, we started telefriending. And we were apprehensive about telefriending in the beginning, which seems mad now because now everything's on the phone, because we knew how much people needed that physical contact. So we were thinking about, you know, over the phone, would people want that? The whole point is people aren't actually ever getting to see anyone or speak to people, or having someone in their home, that, you know, the whole concept of getting to share a cup of tea with somebody. So we were nervous about it, but we knew there were people that we weren't able to reach geographically. There weren't volunteers in that area, or maybe people actually didn't want face-to-face. So we wanted to try telephone befriending. We didn't know how it would exactly go. And we had 3 relationships, and then we had 3 relationships still up until the point of COVID, and now we've got over 120, and we're getting more and more referrals in day by day. And I'd have to say that it's definitely not going to replace, when we can get back to face, we will, but it has shown that the telephone befriending is a really vital standalone service. And it's really interesting.
How have people reacted to it? Like, how have they felt about it?
I think everyone that is different. So everyone that was receiving face-to-face befriending are really struggling with the lack of face-to-face. And like, I was speaking to one person on the phone this week, and he was like, you know, really struggling at the moment. And I was telling him about the groups and activities at Opening Doors and other things. And he was like, honestly, please, I just point blank, do not tell me anything online. Do not tell me about anything on Zoom. Do not suggest anything I'm going to do over the phone to phone. I need to see somebody, and I want that physical contact with somebody. You know, nothing is going to cut it. My mood is not going to be, you're not going to help me feel better. That's all I want and need. So for some people, it's really difficult and challenging. But for other people that have come in to telefriending and specifically for this telephone support, they really welcome it. It's making such a huge impact and difference to their life. And we're getting, and the people that have come forward to telefriending, their lives right now are very different to the people that are receiving, say, the face-to-face service. For them, they just needed extra contact in their life, or they wouldn't have wanted that. And we're finding that we've got a lot more ethnic minorities and a lot more diverse clientele that are coming through for telefriending, far, far different to the face-to-face. And I think that shows some really interesting about different ways that people access things and different ways people want support.
Come back to that if I may, but I want to talk to Carlin for a minute. As somebody who's used the service, you know, what's it been like for you since our last LGBT History Month, if you can remember that far. So what was the service like before? What did you love about it, and what's it like now?
Well, my experience of the face-to-face meetings was, yes, it's great to just be in a room with older bisexuals, and I found that the experience of sharing our memories of the past, how the LGBT community was maybe in the 80s and 90s or earlier, was very valuable, and that's continued. Obviously, it's not the only thing that we talk about. I think it's important that people remember that just because you are older, and older here we're obviously we're defined as anyone over 50, that you do still have a life and you do still have a future, and it's not all just about reminiscing. And I'm aware that there is quite a wide age range, and obviously my experience as someone in my mid-50s is different from that of someone in their 70s, 80s or older, who probably haven't been the people that I would have met at the in-person groups. I do find personally the Zoom groups more useful because I live outside London. So for me, getting into London, once a month early evening was not necessarily the best thing. I do think that the in-person groups are very valuable and have been very valuable. At the moment, obviously, we don't have that opportunity. So for me, Zoom is the next best thing. And I do appreciate that, as Meg was saying, some people don't necessarily have the technical capabilities. They don't have access to the internet. So obviously the telephone befriending is a good option for them. My experience has been that, just having that space where you can share with people of your own age, similar age, has been valuable. One example that I can think of is that recently we were discussing, I know a lot of people have seen the series It's a Sin, and I'd noticed from some of the discussions going on online that there's a huge gulf between the reactions of those of us who lived through that era and for whom it's still quite real and feels quite recent in a way, and those younger people for whom it's history. And I think when you get to that stage where, I'm not saying this defines you being old, but when you get to the stage where your life experience is someone else's history, then there's somewhere where you need a space to talk with people for whom that is also their life experience. And this is not any disrespect to younger people, because I think it is still very important for us to connect over generations. And when young people say, oh, I never knew anything about this, that's an opportunity for us to connect in a way, because our experience is that a lot of what we've gone through in the past didn't happen on the internet. Now everything happens in real time on the internet. We didn't have that. We had newsletters, we had maybe telephone, before the internet, you had something called phone trees. I remember in groups that I was in, you would have this thing where Fred would phone Sue and then Sue would phone John, and that was the way that information got passed on. And obviously now this is done, through WhatsApp or something like that. We didn't have that. And even in the early days of the internet, I mean, I remember being in groups, like the Usenet groups and various email groups, a lot of those have not been preserved for posterity. A lot of that's been lost, those discussions that we had in the past. So I think it's important for those of us who were around in, before the internet or in the early days of the internet, to have that space to connect with each other, but also with younger people as well.
So Colin, if you could say one thing to the quote younger generation of queer people, the single most important thing about It's a Sin or about literally anything else, what would you want them to know?
I think the important thing is that, and this relates to not just queer culture in general, but also I'm thinking more specifically of some of the stuff that's going on at the moment, the anti-trans stuff that is flooding the internet, which is distressing a lot of people. If people try to tell you that this is new and that this is something that you've just made up and you're being trendy, that's not true, because we have always been here. And the fact that you don't know about it doesn't mean that it didn't exist. And that if you look at, our not just history in your history lessons, but our recent history, you are not alone, and we have always been here. We are still here.
Brilliant. And actually, so on that note, slightly, we know that the way in which we describe ourselves and our identities are always evolving and changing, and they've changed so much over the years since It's a Sin is set, to the extent that show doesn't have a huge amount of diversity, does it? In terms of sexualities, anyway. So given that your members and volunteers and staff will span so many generations, how has that affected the way that you've all worked together? Have you had any conversations about the language, let's say, that we use to describe ourselves, and how the organisation has evolved? That could be to anyone, possibly Chrissy, but I'm happy to take it from anyone.
I can do a little bit of this. I think I see the next question is, what's your favourite thing about ODR? That's the next one I've got written down. And what I was going to say was that it's the intergenerational aspect. Mm-hmm. So we have volunteers. We've got volunteers now that were born in the 21st century, which is quite scary. And we've so very, very young volunteers, up to volunteers in their 80s. So it's a huge age range. And every volunteer comes into the organisation via an induction. And part of the induction's all online at the moment, but it's not my preferred method of delivery. When we're all in a room, everyone's at different tables. It's very communicative, and we want people to talk about exactly these issues, because we feel younger people and older people's experiences are very different. We recognise as well, as Callum was referring to, even the membership is kind of intergenerational. So someone in the 50s has a very different life experience from someone in the 70s or 80s. And we want to have this kind of cross-generational interaction where people can talk about how they felt about themselves and how they feel about themselves, and how their experience has been developed by what was available to them in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and how that's different to how people talk about themselves now. And we talk about language very specifically. We talk about, is it useful to talk about LGBTQ+? Because people will come in and talk about wanting to volunteer for a gay organisation. So, well, is it just a gay organisation? So there's a lot of focus.
When they say that, do they mean that, or are they just using shorthand?
I think they're using the language that they're used to using. I mean, it's usually people my age and above. I don't think it's a slur, generally speaking. I don't think they intend to exclude people, but this is how they always sorts of things, and that's the conversation. Not, you shouldn't use that, but why do you use that? And what about the inclusion of other people? And are we a gay organisation, or are we something slightly different? So yeah, I think it's a very important part of what we do is to have that discussion about language about changing language, about appropriate language. And volunteers, and I mean, Mike could talk about this, how sometimes volunteers are challenged by the language that members use, and how we can support that as well.
Tell me a bit about that, Meg, if you could.
Well, just a couple of things sort of came to mind which have been making me really happy lately. Because basically with telefriending, people submit a call log after each call that they take, and so I get an overview of what people have been discussing. And there are quite a few members that are really wanting to hear way more about gender fluidity and what being non-binary means, and with such curiosity and being like, I've not heard these terms before. And then I get volunteers emailing me, and I'm sending off reading lists and different like YouTube links and things that they're then going back to their member in. And I've got quite a few members that are sort of, you know, in the beginning of the assessment, we always ask people what their pronouns are. And then they'll be like, pronouns, like what does that mean? Like what are you talking about? And then we explain and sort of have that discussion. And I'm finding that it's been really, really nice watching for some people, obviously it's not for all people, but for some people, this learning of instead the other way from the younger people, this new vocab that has always been there, and it's not one of those sort of things, it's just for them and their experiences. It isn't something that they were aware of, and you're both sort of teaching and learning from one another, which is sort of really nice. And it's coming from a place of like genuine curiosity, but then for other people, because perhaps they haven't felt able to explore their gender expression. And then I've got quite a few people that are, you know, coming out and sort of transitioning later on in life and having those conversations with the volunteer, and then they've got access to with the internet and lots of other sort of stuff. And I think that's something that's been really nice to watch unfold lately, part of the telefriending service, which I think is quite special.
Do you think that, you know, as Carlin's been told, that, you know, all of this transitioning and trans issues are all just a thing that happens to teenagers on the internet because it's a social contagion? Clearly, if you're 70 years old, you would be unaffected by this.
Yeah, completely. Because I think, obviously, we know that people, and we've always existed since, you know, the start of time, and it isn't. But I think what it is for some people is they've not had certain languages or certain things, or they've not felt able to express themselves for different reasonings, and now more people are feeling that ability to express themselves and have those questions and think about things that they might not have been able to otherwise. And you know, it's like you cannot be what you do not see, and I think that's really important. And having like one member we're supporting at the moment, for them, they've never felt able, and whenever they've tried to do anything within the constraints of their family, there was so much pushback, and now they're living alone, and they feel a certain level of isolation away from their friends, and with their volunteer befriender, they're discussing like hair and makeup and different places where you can buy dresses and all these other things that they hadn't felt able to do with somebody before. And it's opened up that space for them because it's this really safe sounding board. And that's the beautiful thing about Opening Doors London, is especially within the befriending service, you're going to be speaking to somebody who just really wants to listen to you and help you and give you any information that you want, and you're never going to offend them, or if you might, you know, we can have that discussion in a really like open and sensitive way, and you're not going to have to ever worry about being judged either.
Okay, I want to move on a little bit onto what things have been like under this latest lockdown and everything that's been going on since March with COVID. Do you feel like there have been any particular challenges that have been faced specifically by your members and also the wider LGBT older people's community that perhaps are not being experienced by other people or being experienced in a specific way? I want to start though with Carlin. I'd be interested to hear how you've been getting on and how the people that you talk to have been getting on.
Well, I think the main thing is that, you know, you don't have the external feedback for your identity. Obviously that affects a lot of people, but I think particularly for LGBTQ people, you know, I know that a lot of people have been feeling, you know, unsupported, particularly in issues around gender, because they don't have that that feedback from the outside world, which sometimes that's been a positive thing, for some people. If you feel that you don't pass, then it's sometimes easier to just sit on your own, and I know that for some people it's actually been a way that they've been able to, it's been a space to kind of think about their own identity and how they want to present to the world and how they feel in themselves. So I don't think it's been all negative, but obviously I don't want to downplay the side that is very isolating and has led to a lot of people's mental health worsening. I haven't personally experienced that to any great degree, but I know people for whom it has been, they've been isolated previously, and because of the pandemic, they feel that they've gone back to, the state that they were before, being kind of shut in and not having any sort of social life. Again, I think that the internet has helped incredibly, certainly for me, but then, I'm relatively tech savvy. I'm privileged in that I have access to the internet, plenty of bandwidth. That's not the case for everyone. And also, I do know people for whom interacting via Zoom is quite a difficult thing for them, for either mental health reasons or because they're neurodivergent, for example. They don't feel happy with that kind of interaction. So again, although that's relevant to a lot of other people, it's, I think, particularly difficult for the LGBTQ community, because our social life is more restricted often than other people's anyway, and particularly if you're older. So yeah, that's been pretty much my experience, but also the fact that we do have services like Opening Doors and other services. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff with Spectra, for example, which supports trans and non-binary people, not specifically older people, but that's been a useful service for me during the pandemic as well.
And could you just give an example for of an activity that an older LGBTQ plus person may have done, before the pandemic, that they're not really able to, outside of like the support groups and that sort of structure? So what are people most missing right now?
I think things like just going out and meeting people in cafes, which again, maybe older. I don't want to be too stereotypical. Probably not many of us older people would have been going out to nightclubs every day. And I think the way that we've tended to socialize has often been in environments where we're not necessarily out as LGBTQ, but we meet with other LGBTQ friends. And, often if there's a safe environment nearby, a coffee shop where it's LGBTQ friendly, that's the kind of place that I would probably have gone to and met with friends of mine. For example, I have a friend who's a wheelchair user who has difficulty accessing a lot of LGBTQ environments because they're not always in buildings that are accessible. So we've always kind of met in local cafes which are friendly. And I think that's the kind of thing, it seems like a small thing, but it's something that a lot of us are missing at the moment.
So it's the loss of the queer community, the wider queer community. Yes, I think
so.
It's not the
even if it's not necessarily labelled as queer community, it's queer people meeting. Not everything that we do as queer people is labelled as LGBTQ.
Well, Costa's queer if we're in it, quite frankly.
Exactly. Yes.
Chrissy, you wanted to?
Yeah. Also, the people that are not out to the families or the people that they live with. and it's increasingly difficult. Oh, it's very difficult for them to have this kind of online interaction in a way that they could just pop out to a cafe and have a coffee with people who they knew, or go to a group of people that they knew. So there's a dynamic there with people, and I think that kind of reflects on who sometimes who accesses the service. I mean, in both ways. I think sometimes people can use the telephone and feel secure because they don't have to be visible in public as they see it with other LGBTQ people. That's one aspect. But also other people will prefer just to slip out and meet with people discreetly if people that they live with don't know. And it could be their parents, or it could be their married family, or it could be their children, it could be anyone at all, housemates. But I think that's an aspect of things as well.
Meg, you mentioned earlier that there was that you are getting a much wider, more diverse group of people who are asking to be part of the Befriending Service. Can you say a little bit more about that? How things have evolved? Are there new issues that you're seeing? People wanting to talk about different things? The types of people who are coming forward?
Yeah, I think it must be to do with maybe. I think there's obviously lots of different reasons for this. One, I think sadly for like particularly lesbian and bisexual women, sometimes that they feel as if they're not deserving of the service. Say, oh, there's somebody more isolated, or other sort of things. Sometimes can happen that because I say that only from the experience of when I have the initial phone call with them, and then they're like umming and ahhing about if the service is right for them, and then they'll sort of like say their reasons why they think it might not be, because they get to see like this person once a week or whatever, but then we then go through someone's motivations of why they want it. And I think having it on the phone, they feel as if they're taking up less of somebody's time for some people, rather than this big, somebody coming over and that. And yeah, we've got a lot more ethnic minorities, much like really significant higher percentage, and also a significantly higher percentage of trans and non-binary people as well. In fact, with the face-to-face befriending service, we didn't have very many people. We had nobody that had their, defined their gender as genderqueer or non-binary or fluid. But in the telefriending service, we've got a significant proportion of people do. And I can't say exactly why that's happening, but all I can say is that I'm really glad it is happening. And it's amazing because when it comes to the matching, we really think about, so why does somebody want to be a part of this service? What have they been missing in their lives, or the kind of people that they're speaking to or not? And then Chrissy does this phenomenal job of finding the most incredible volunteers that we get to match people with similar sort of life histories or experiences, if that's what they're both wanting. So then you form a really lovely relationship and things. And I think so that's what we're, since seeing that this is what telefriending is opening up, we're wanting to do more and more work to bring in more diverse volunteers so that we can support our members better than ever as well, which I think is allowed for with COVID, everything being online and remote, because people with time as well, with the face-to-face service, volunteers had to get to the offices and the sort of different nights as well, whereas now people can do things in their own time over longer periods. And so I think it just makes things more accessible for a lot of people.
Do you think also that the telephone is more anonymous, and maybe that's why people feel a bit more able to engage with a telephone service than they would with something that's online or face to face?
Yeah, because the people who are on the telephone, majority of them, they don't want it to then move over to the Zoom or other things. And we are getting more people like, oh, actually, I'd quite like to meet this person. But they've now got that opportunity that they've spoken, they've got to know, they don't feel judged. Because for many people, you're being judged all the time. And especially, for like, especially people who are more, sorry, my whole words have gone then, but you're facing more prejudice all the time in your life, and you're experiencing that, and it's nervous to then invite somebody else into your home that then you don't know exactly how it's going to go. You might have heard about Opening Doors London or some positive things or not, but you might have felt reflected or other things, whereas this is a way to sort of try something out over the phone and then see. And hopefully, I really hope that when the time comes, that for those people that would like to see them face to face, we'll be able to support that. And for those who are enjoying it being on the phone, that they can stay on the phone as well.
Okay, so actually on that note, what things do you reckon that you might keep after you've all been vaccinated? What's actually, what have you thought, oh my God, this is brilliant, we're going to keep that? And will people still be able to access on different channels? So what's going to happen?
Yeah, I don't think we'll get rid of any of the different ways of doing things. I think what it's done is it shows the need to open things up. Like with the group, online groups and activities, I think we've had people from other countries that have joined in, and I think that's amazing. And like this week alone, I've had a referral for who wants to be part of the Befriending Service from Merseyside, somebody from Bristol. I had somebody from Devon who's now joined, and the person from Devon, the amount of phone calls I've had with them, because in the beginning they were so nervous. They're like, oh my gosh, no one's going to find out I'm gay, are they? And like, we're just so petrified because they're coming out in later life, and there was all this sort of things. And now they've got it, and they feel the safe that they know that this person's only going to call on I'm just saying Tuesday at 4 as an example, and then otherwise, so they get this small ability to do something where they can talk about something that of course they wouldn't want that to then be face to face. And for some volunteers, they might not be able to volunteer unless it was online. So I definitely think that it just shows how there's the need for all of it, and other people it's going to be desperate. Let's get back to face as soon as we can. So I think it's just shown the need for always thinking, like expanding different ways that people can access. You definitely don't want to go back to a way which makes the service less accessible for people who need the most accessible things. Yeah.
Chrissy?
Yeah, I think it's done up some interesting things. We had an inquiry. I don't know if this is going to go anywhere, but we had an inquiry from Northern Ireland. And we haven't had anything from Northern Ireland previously, from someone who was interested in supporting people in rural communities, the invisible people in rural communities. And that's an amazing thing if we could possibly do that. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it does to reinforce what Meg's saying. We will, I think, develop a hybrid service where when there are groups like the By the Way group, which was meeting in Tabby's house, which is where we work from in Tavistock Square. And then if we go back to that, then we would have a face-to-face meeting, but people could still call in over Zoom, so we could do both of those things at the same time. That's possible, and that's what we'd like to continue. So to have people, when we first went into lockdown, I had a number of contacts from volunteers who had left because they'd left London and they couldn't volunteer anymore. And can we start again? Can we come back and do this again? And I'm like, yeah, that's wonderful, yeah, of course. And some of them went back to Befriending, which was lovely. So yeah.
And Carlin, as a challenge to the staff here, what would you want them to do once we've all been vaccinated?
Well, I think that, it's interesting some of the issues that have come up, because I think what we've seen is that, Opening Doors is now meeting needs that have always been there, but that haven't been articulated or that haven't been, made explicit. I mean, even with, the issue of having stuff online, having, people being able to do stuff remotely, a lot of people have been saying, disabled people particularly, have been saying, well, we've needed this for years, and it's only now that suddenly, because it's affecting non-disabled people, it's been done. And I think it's very important that those things are still there when we go back to whatever. I don't think we will go back to normal as it was. And I think we have to, now look back and say, well, actually, was normal all that good? It wasn't that good for a lot of people. I do feel that it's important to, to bring in face-to-face meetings as soon as it's safe to do so, because I think that does offer something that is not, not otherwise available to people. But certainly, even for me as someone who lives outside London, there's, now obviously, as Chrissy said, there's a recognition of geographical isolation. That is something that, can be overcome to a certain extent with online and telephone. So, that there's all kinds of isolation that affect our community, and there are different ways of dealing with it. And, you know, we need to look at all those different ways. Obviously, you know, funding permitting, which is another issue, isn't it?
Yeah. So throwing this open slightly wider for anyone who wants it, as an organisation, what challenge would you make to government, to the NHS, to social care providers, to whatever, about how to best address the support needs of older LGBTQ plus people? Anyone?
But I mean, I'll just start it with firstly, I think from what I've seen and I experience is I don't think that people are seeing being LGBTQ as something that needs to be spoken about or discussed always. So for instance, when I get referrals from care homes and things, I'm going to say 99% of times I've never had a referral for somebody that isn't a gay white man when it's an external referral. When it's self-referrals, it's completely different story. It's a completely different story. But that says something to you. Why am I only getting referrals from external organisations that are white gay men? And I think that that's got a lot to do with visibility, with questions that people are asking, what people feel comfortable with. And so I firstly think that there needs to be far more open discussion about people's, you know, gender and sexuality in a way that makes people feel really supported, makes people feel seen, so that people are able to access the support. Because, for instance, from the service that I run, over 60% don't have access to the internet. So how are they going to hear about Opening Doors London? They're going to hear about us through their GP. They're going to hear about us through maybe their care worker. And so in those channels of the only people that they are seeing, that they need to be the people that are the most open and accepting and opening up that conversation and making room and space for somebody to be able to give a more holistic picture of who they are, so that they can then access other services and be put in touch with them. So that's one thing that I would sort of start off with.
So is it training? Is it train every GP, every care worker, every nurse?
And to see it as it is something important, it is something amazing, you know, who we are as people, and it does come into, it does affect, you know, people's mental health or other sort of things. So if you're not opening and knowing about the whole person of somebody, then you can't really address any other issue, I feel, if you're not seeing all of somebody.
But what difference does it make, Meg? Honestly, obviously, LGBTQ plus people, they're all just the same as us, really, right? So they don't have any special needs. How can they possibly, you know, it's not our job. We just treat them the same as we do everyone else.
And I hear that time and time and time again, that we're not different, you know, we're all the same. And difference is amazing, difference is wonderful, difference is beautiful. And you can't treat somebody, we're not all the same at all.
So what do you say to those people? What needs do they have that may not be taken into account if, for instance, if the people working with them, the people who care for them, don't know that they're queer?
Yeah, what were you going to say then, Christy?
I was going to say that we get lots of feedback from, we do training in care homes, and we get feedback from care home managers who say exactly what you just said. No, we treat everyone the same. There's no discrimination here. Everybody gets treated the same, and that's. And to address your question, that's to make people feel included. The conversations need to be about more than just, in a care home situation, your family, your grandchildren, your wife or husband of opposite sex that's passed on. How can we reflect the visibility of queer people in a care home setting? How can we overcome prejudice of other people or discrimination from other people in a care home setting? How are for example, for trans people or non-binary people, how do we deal with embodiment issues? We've got medical issues that may be different. We've got we may be gender fluid. We may want to present one way one day and one way a different way. How can we train people not to feel uncomfortable about that? And people do feel very, very uncomfortable about that, and it's not seen as authentic. It's seen as just weird. So how can we address all of these different issues that people genuinely encounter?
And what happens if all of these things are not addressed? What happens if, carers, GPs, medical professionals, whoever, are just ignoring it?
Well, then we have people, individuals suffer from lack of recognition, lack of proper treatment, and lack of understanding. But we don't get referrals, as Meg said, if we don't. They're simply not recognised as being as having issues, and knowing where to send people too. I mean, there's lots of things, isn't there?
Yeah, and people then often say, you know, they feel as if they've gone back in the closet, you know, and you hear that sentences time and time again. And for instance, you know, I'm supporting one woman at the moment, and she lives in supported housing, and the residents all meet every day downstairs for like tea and coffee and biscuits. And she just doesn't go anymore. So she's not in that. That's in that sort of thing, still running in COVID safely in the thing. But she doesn't go because she always gets comments about how she's, or what she's wearing. People don't speak to her, or they're whispering about her when she's there. You know what I mean? And it just sort of breaks your heart, because recently, you know, she's lost a couple of people really close to her in her life. And it's a time when you need that support and community, and you're going downstairs into a room and you're watching all these people mingling and having that community and making friends, but you're seen as different. What you're wearing, they're not accepting. And so instead you're just excluded in your your room. And imagine if she hadn't heard about Opening Doors London, she didn't have her befriender that she gets to speak to each week and rant and experience these things. And in these different microaggressions, you're just hearing time again that people are experiencing from sometimes, you know, care workers too, and then being like, oh, is that your boyfriend's co? And it's like your co. And then like, it's just an example of something I've heard. And it's and you just imagine having your whole life, and then you're just experiencing a lot of other problems with your health and whatnot, and you're having to experience those comments time and time again. So it's not even that you're not being seen. Sometimes you are being seen, but in a way that's really negative and really, really awful and like terrible, and making you feel really crap about yourself, and you haven't got those people that are sort of standing up for you.
We did a little research, just briefly,
sure.
We pass on. We did a bit of research with some of our members 2-3 years ago, and people who were eligible to use the services in Aged Care Camden, the general services, not our services, and 97% of the people that were eligible had never used the general services. So only 3% of our members who had been eligible to use general services within Aged Care Camden had used them. And I think that just says that statistic, for me, says everything, really. I'm sorry, Colin.
Yeah, Colin, anything to add to all of that? What do queer people need? Older people?
Yeah, I think all that I would add to that is that in terms of the way that a lot of services approach older people, is that there's this sort of assumption that older people are, you know, traditional, and that we will be offended by being asked about questions about sexuality and gender. And that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, really, because, you know, a lot of people sometimes are unwilling to answer those questions. But if that's true, it's often because they've been in the closet for so long that they're censoring themselves. You know, so if someone says, you know, tell me about your sexuality, they're thinking, well, you know, I can't say that I'm gay, because that they've got this whole lifetime of having been in the closet. And also, even if they're not, they don't know if that is a safe place to come out. You know, is it actually safe to come out to their care worker or to their GP or whoever? So I think that you know, that there tends to be this feeling that older people are reluctant to talk about these issues, but there's a whole history behind why people are often reluctant to, and it doesn't mean that, you know, nobody's queer. And it just feeds into this whole, you know, view that, oh, younger people are fine to talk about this, and that they'll volunteer any information about their sexuality or gender quite openly, which again is not necessarily true of all younger people. But it sets up this kind of false dichotomy, and again it kind of gives the impression that there's a huge gulf between generations in terms of, you know, sexuality and gender. Whereas, as we've talked earlier about the difference in vocabulary, and again, some older people may not recognize the newer vocabulary that's being used. Again, you know, as you said, well, what's gender fluid? But they may actually identify as gender fluid or trans or, you know, demi boy, whatever. They may want to use gender neutral pronouns, but they've not been exposed to that in the past. So it's just not something that they've ever thought they could be or do.
Brilliant. So we're getting towards the end of our time, but very quickly, possibly from Meg, if I am an older LGBTQ+ person who wants to access the service, how can I do so? What can I expect to happen? And what would be the next steps?
Yeah, so two things. If you want to become a member of Opening Doors London, the easiest thing is to go onto our website and then click on become a member, and it's free membership organisation, and as a member you get to enjoy going to any of our groups and activities. But then if more specifically you want to be part of the Befriending Service, you can call me or email, and so the number is 07498 025 475. And then on our website we've got the number as well, and then you can email, and we'll just then have a chat, and I'll tell you more about the service, I'll tell you more about our matching process, and find out about you, what you like, you know, what you want to talk about, and all of those sort of things, and then get your availability and match you with somebody, because we've got loads of incredible volunteers all waiting, and it's definitely a two-way street, the partnership of both of you getting so much out of it. And it's a friendship, it's such a beautiful friendship with boundaries, but still a friendship nonetheless. And I've got a little quote which I'm going to read, because hopefully this will explain more of the service of people that really like it, from one of my. It's amazing, it is brilliant, I'm really liking it. It's just being able to talk to somebody. I don't have to restrain, I don't have to think about the words, don't have to worry about being a lesbian woman. Can't remember not having to think about that. Was laughing last night thinking about our calls and what we talk about. So many memories coming out with it too. Best thing is having someone to talk freely to. I lost my best friend and I didn't have anyone else to speak to freely, and I'm not out in my community, but now I'm speaking to this person. She's a lot younger, but that's okay. I like it. I like hearing the vibrance in her voice.
Lovely.
And I just think,
And just a technical question, how often can someone expect a call, and for what period of time?
Yeah, you can expect a call once a week. If you want it to be twice a week, we will endeavour to make that happen too. So really it's about what your needs, and so everything's tailored on that. And you can have 3 phone calls and think this isn't for me, or even 1 phone call and think this isn't for me, or you can be still having this relationship 2 years down the line. We're not at all prescriptive. This is about making something that's right for you.
Okay. Chrissy, imagine that I'm someone who would like to volunteer with Opening Doors London. How would I go about doing that?
That's fine as well. So back to the volunteering page on the website. There are all of the open vacancies are advertised on the website, or you can just drop an email to volunteering at openingdoorslondon.org.uk, and we will get back to you, or we will call you and have a chat about it. Again, very, very much the same thing.
And how long between me contacting you and saying I'd like to volunteer and actually getting on the phone as a befriender or doing something else?
So we recognise that different people have got different capacities. So if you were working full time and you had to go through the induction process, it might take you a lot longer than someone who wasn't working at all and just did it. So to some extent, the time is controlled by yourself, and we're very flexible about that. Some people do the induction in days, like 2 or 3 days. We've got to do external checks as well, the DBS check, and we ask for references. So the quickest I would say would be a week before I hand you on to Meg, and then there's more training. And then it's to do with suitability of available members to be clients. If we go back to face-to-face befriending, then we would ask you'd volunteer for a particular group, and as soon as you've done the induction and the group training, then it's a monthly group, or it's a weekly group, or it's a twice a month group. So it starts in that way. So it's partly determined by yourself and partly determined by the structure that we're working in.
And right now, you'll accept both members and volunteers from anywhere in the world?
I think that realistically, we're accepting people to volunteer from the United Kingdom because we have to do the DBS checks. Mm-hmm. But anywhere in the United Kingdom, people can come, and that would be great. As far afield as possible. We are just taking on 2 ambassadors people who are old enough to be members that go out and advocate on behalf of ODL, and they have just both moved to Newcastle, so they're going to work from Newcastle. So that's really nice.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Colin, any last words?
Well, no, I would just say, you know, just if you want to get involved with Opening Doors, just do, you know, just get in touch with them. And, you know, as you've heard today, there's all sorts of different ways, different groups that you can get involved in. I mean, I've been involved with the By the Way group and the trans and non-binary group, but there are plenty of others. I think there's, you know, there's gay men's group, lesbian groups, various kind of, you know, there's a coffee morning thing, isn't there, that's now moved over to Zoom. So, you know, just do feel free to get involved, and don't worry about whether you are out or not, or how long you've been out. You know, there's a vast variety of, you know, from people who've been out since they were teenagers to people who've literally just come out in their 70s and 80s. I've met a huge variety of different people with different experiences, and that's what makes the group so valuable, is that we do all have, you know, something in common, but we also have different experiences, and it's a great opportunity to listen to other people. And as long as you are, you know, respectful of other people's experiences and identities, then you're welcome at ODL.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. I think we're going to wrap it up. We're out of time. Thank you to Colin, Chrissy and Meg for joining us today. We hope that anyone watching this has enjoyed it. Please do contact Opening Doors London, or in fact, if you don't know where to find them, call Switchboard, we'll tell you as well. And have a lovely, lovely LGBT History Month, such as it is, and we'll see you all next year.